very much, Commissioner. That was certainly a wide-ranging and deeply thoughtful discussion and prompts many, many questions. I will start with one, and then we'll invite the audience to join in. You talked about our legacy of localism and the implications of that. You touched on the role of the federal government. What should we think of in terms of the proper role of the different levels of our government? You suggested that perhaps we ought to have more of a state level focus for curriculum. Very important change, certainly. What other changes should we be thinking of among our different levels of responsibility?
I think getting those different levels right is not simple, first of all. I'm not ducking the question at all, that's a fact. It does seem to me, to start with what I touched on, that having 700 districts, each trying to design a math curriculum, doesn't make any sense. And actually, I'm not alone in thinking that. Florida just invested $200 million in a statewide math curriculum. And it was, it was intelligent of them to start with mathematics for obvious reasons. It's much more difficult to do it in history. When I was a student of US history, I thought of it as the Civil War. Then I went to Washington, I learned it was the war between the states. Then I went to Vanderbilt, and I found out it was does anyone know?
War of Northern Aggression.
Thank you. Got some good students here. War of Northern Aggression. So probably Alabama and New York will not agree on how to teach the 1860s. But that's fine. We can still have a state conversation about curriculum. Professional, the training of teachers. Right now we have over 100 institutions do it. I think we need to think very seriously about a state responsibility not to put an ineffective teacher into lifetime employment. And what we have is an important gateways on professional certification. It seems to me right now we've sort of said to our accrediting bodies, NK, TAC, and the state, you go into that school, you see that it's kind of doing what your accrediting body wants, and if it is, then we accept your graduate as ready to teach. It isn't so. I watched, Hunter put in a videotaping system, I watched hundreds of our student teachers teaching in your public schools in their student teaching experience. And then I looked at their transcripts, our coursework, and they were getting all A's. Some of them were wonderful teachers, some of them couldn't teach. This was their last semester, this was their field experience at the end. It was too late. They were going to graduate, there was nothing we could do. They were going to go into the schools. So we need a statewide, sort of conception of what it is that effective teaching is. I think at the local level, what we have to become more flexible. This is the other end of the coin, the side of the coin. Much more flexible in thinking of the lessons from the best charter schools about flexibility of what a school looks like, of its choice of how to inculcate deep learning. Look, Debbie Meyer ran this very famous school in Harlem that was quite on the far side of constructivism, lots of debating and lots of project-based learning and so forth and so on, at a time when it wasn't very popular. And her best response to her critics was, my students ace your assessments, right? So don't tell me that I'm doing something wrong. I will accept the challenge of meeting your assessment regime while having my students learn how to think in the way that my teachers believe. That's a powerful model. So we paradoxically need to be more thoughtful about what belongs to the state and more flexible about what happens at the school level. And that's not necessarily a contradiction. As I say, well-designed curriculum allow for choice and flexibility. It's not a straitjacket. When teachers choose from a longer list of books, they exercise choice. They just don't do it from nowhere. Or they don't do it based on what the textbook publishers have given them. People say to me, we have local curriculum. I say, well, let's see how many people are using publisher X's textbook. Right? I know we're not a textbook adoption state, but de facto, I wouldn't push that argument too much. So school level, state level, and federal level, let's be transparent and accountable right across this.
I'm going to bring you the mic so maybe you want
Great.
As a result of the state budget cuts, we had to turn our other microphones to the budget.
I guess my question is for a comment that I think the basic problem is the assumption that education is a profession and educators are professionals. I mean, if you look at the people going into the quote-unquote profession, you're talking about, on the average, mediocrities. The chairman of the typical education department at a college could say, on average, our kids are smarter than black studies majors or phys ed majors. That's about the level of education majors. Now, it seems to me that if you want a profession, you don't constantly have to reinvent things. I mean, physicians are no longer, there's no physician today say, the problem, we have a blood problem, so let's use leeches to solve our problems. There are no, it seems to me as an outsider, there are no basic concepts that all educators today accept as how people should do teaching of reading or mathematics or whatever. So how can you claim to have a profession?
First of all, while it's true that we're not Finland, in Finland only the top 10% of college graduates can become teachers, I think there's a bit of mythology at the bottom of your question. The truth is that just to use SATs as a reasonable proxy, there's a more or less straight line from early childhood teachers to high school teachers. The high school teachers nationally now are above average for four-year college SAT results. They are a very strong group of students. Are they the strongest, right? The top 10%? No, but they are very strong. We have a challenge for those students who are going into teaching early childhood, and then like the middle school. I mean, it really is. It's a slope, and it's a pretty straight line. I think one of the, no one wants an economic crisis, least of all me when I look at our budgets. But there is one silver lining, and that is that, for example, last year there were approximately 8 applicants in New York City for every early childhood teaching position, about 8 applicants for every childhood teaching position. So that the statistics of the labor market will drive quality up. Principals need to only take better teachers. On the question of, and we are looking at our content assessments, for example, for teachers to ensure that they actually have mastered the content they're going to teach, and we can continue to look at that. On the other side, on the profession, I would say this. There is now research for the first time, and I don't want to pretend that it's definitive. It isn't, but it's better than it ever has been, that looks at specific teaching skills and matches them to student outcomes. The 3 biggest areas, the University of Virginia has done massive studies of their Head Start programs where they trace specific skills, teaching skills, to learning outcomes for children. Teach for America had a major, and still does, major investment in looking at these relationships. Doug Lemov from a group of charter schools in New York is about to publish a book on teaching taxonomies where he's done the same research. And what's interesting, and Charlotte Danielson to some degree as well, there is important overlap in the research findings here. So for example, it turns out that your choice of engaging in visual contact with individual students versus your physical choice to move over and stand next to them versus your calling them out by name makes major differences. Your choices of when to do that or whether not to do that have important consequences. There are communication skills that make a difference. Another example, it turns out that many teachers are willing to accept half correct answers, quarter correct answers, 3/4 correct answers. It's a human trait. You're a teacher, you hope your students are learning. Somebody, some student puts up their hand, they kind of get it right, you go on to the next question. Bad practice. Turns out if you hold out for the right question, right answer to the question for young children all the time, everyone learns more. I mean, again, the data here is pretty good at this point. So are we where medicine is? Absolutely not. We've spent 0.001% of the research. I'm sure that's too high. Too high is a number, not too high if we need more money. But I think we're not where medicine is. But we are not without some good sense of what good pedagogy is. And I think the demonstration of it, it's a little bit like pornography, frankly. As the Supreme Court used to say, it may be hard to define, but you know it when you see it. I assure you that if I had shown you videotapes of those Hunter students in their classrooms, I suspect there would have been quite a lot of agreement in this room as to what effective teaching was and what it wasn't. And then I believe I could have brought in to this room a group of people who were working with us at Hunter, teacher years, the project, who had spent thousands of hours analyzing that teaching, stopping the video, taking it apart, and focusing on the skills. So, are we there yet? No. Are we on our way? I think slowly.
I will ask a question. You started out talking about classical Greece, and that brings to mind the idea of political culture. We kind of look back at those days as a wonderful time for a high level of political culture. What would you say about the political culture either in New York or in the country today? You are someone who is talking about making some significant changes. Is it possible to do that? What would you say about the political culture, nationally or at the state level, whichever is preferable for you?
Well, I think part of the challenge is that in any difficult time, and we are surely in that, there's a very human reaction, which is to sort of, almost like a hedgehog, right? You bring yourself into a ball, you're very conscious of your territory. You are somewhat anguished and anxious about what's going on. You're worried about your job. You're worried about whatever. If you're a politician, about your election. If you're a teacher, about your job. All of us are nervous in that time. And that tends to have an effect on public discourse, right? It tends to make the public discourse a little bit more zero-sum games, right? Your game is my loss. It's a nervous, immediate reaction. It's hard in that situation to sort of get people to step out of that game and to sort of take the question from a very different angle. But what's interesting is how rarely that's actually tried. I don't mean this in a naive way. It's just an empirical point. We tend to climb into those debates where they are. And then we're surprised when we can't make a huge change to them. But once we're in those debates where we are, and where the debaters are, we're just one more person who's lined up on one side or other of that zero-sum game. Early press conference, I think I said, I'm not a politician, and people laughed and so forth. But I actually meant it, maybe naively, but I actually meant it in the following sense, that I think a commissioner of education shouldn't actually be a politician. That doesn't mean that she or he should be naive. What it means is we should, to the best of our ability, speak about these issues of education, of what is an educated person, about the quality of our curriculum, the quality of our assessments, the quality of our teacher preparation, the quality of our schools and our districts and our school boards, in a way that focuses on children, students. And my hope is that in doing so, there'll at least be a space where folks who otherwise, are worried about what's the 5% budget cut going to mean to me, and they're right to be concerned about that. They have fiduciary responsibilities and teaching responsibilities. But that they know there's a place where we can ask those questions that will, in fact, in the end, make major impact on those budgetary questions and those decisions, but come at it from outside that zero-sum game. And again, I understand why people are reacting the way they do. People are under enormous pressure right now. And it's very hard to step back from that pressure. For all of us. We all feel like we're fighting for every last dollar and every last resource and every last regulation. It's not easy for the teachers looking at this sort of tsunami of online and remote learning, and they're asking, they're nervous. And we don't have simple answers yet for what the new technologies will mean and how the teachers' roles will evolve. And so there's a natural instinct, I'm just using that as an example, to be concerned. But if we ask about the caliber of learning, what is a good online course? It has threaded discussions. It has interaction with teachers. There are ways of thinking about it very differently if instead you start with a fundamental conception of education.
We have a question back here.
Yep.
Yeah. You can be next. Commissioner, the point that you made in regard to individual school districts developing their own curricula, you could say the same thing about states actually developing their standards and assessments. Each state is doing the same thing, kind of reinventing the same wheel.
Right.
I know I've heard you, your senior deputy, and the chancellor talk about interest to participate in a consortium with other states. I'm seeing you say that you're still interested in that. Will that proceed in a 3-step process then? Would we identify a consortia of other states that identify an educated citizen in a consistent sort of way, then proceed to standards, and then proceed to assessment?
Yeah. This is a really important question, and it's not an easy one to answer. Right now, most states have signed on to multiple consortiums for very good pragmatic reasons. We don't know where those consortiums will end up in their thinking. So one consortium might end up with a very simple model of summative assessments that, and they just want the dollars and they'll get it off their books and let the feds pay for it. Another consortium might want a complex model that has interim assessments and formative assessments and a computerized delivery system, right? And they kind of know in the back of their heads, if they even care, that will have a major curriculum impact. Because once you talk about interim assessments and formative assessments, you are talking about things that happen every other week in a classroom, right? And so you've brought the assessment more and more into the curriculum. We are absolutely engaged in those conversations. We've already started. And, to the extent possible, I'm bringing my voice and that of the regions to bear on the consortiums in which we are in early discussions. The problem is this, from my point of view. Because of the constitutional structure of the United States, because so much of education, theoretically at least, is left through the Ninth Amendment to the states, the order, as you know, is Common Core standards, then assessments, and then maybe nothing in many states, right? We just let the districts do whatever they've been doing for 100 years. Again, this probably is naive, but I have the kind of Yale Law School model. What I mean by that is this. Yale Law School does not, to the best of my knowledge, maybe I'm wrong, spend inordinate amounts of time preparing its students to take the bar exam. Right? It knows they'll have to take the bar exam, but it assumes that if it teaches them well, right, if it teaches them law in a fundamental sense, yeah, they can memorize for the bar exam. And they do. They tend to pass at a rather high rate. Now, you could say that's because they're smart to begin with and so forth and so on. But I believe, in a way, that the Debbie Meyer model is important. If we have good curriculum, rich frameworks that make sense across the state, we have a very mobile, particularly in our urban centers, very mobile population. You could study the ancient Egyptians 3 times as a kid, right, in this state, very easily, just by moving from one district to another. That's ridiculous. So it seems to me, if we can get a good curriculum, if we can get teacher preparation around a good curriculum. Then, obviously, we hope for good assessments, and everything I will say and do in part of whatever consortium we end up with will be to argue for assessments that allow for essays or whatever it may be, meaningful assessments. But in the end, I think we'll do fine on those assessments. And more importantly, I think our students will be learning quality material, which after all I thought was the point, right? So would I prefer us to have done this the other way around? Yeah, but then it was unimaginable in this country to have a national discussion about curriculum. I mean, it was almost unimaginable to have a national discussion about assessments. And the feds felt they couldn't insist on what they did. Common Core, they used the National Governors Association and the CCSSO, the Chief State School Officers, as proxies, if you will. They're very insistent it's not a federal project. But look, all the states got involved, and there's a Common Core standards. Then they said to themselves, well, we can't have one assessment, set of assessments in the United States, and people would scream. Texas already did, but with the Common Core standards. Imagine now we have one set of exams for the entire country. So we'll use a kind of modified version of the standards argument. We'll have maybe half a dozen consortiums, maybe a few more, a few less. And they have to be cross-comparable, their results. So I mean, they're sort of using the endpoint to ensure some commonality among the assessments. And then we'll get to curriculum not. Okay, we'll just leave that where it is. So, is this simple? No, it's not. Should we wait forever? I mean, it may take 4 or 5 years to get these assessments. And should we do nothing about our curriculum in the meantime? No. If we teach good history, if we teach good literature, good language use, good mathematics, we'll do fine on these things.
Sure. I'm Nancy Willie Schiff from SUNY System Administration. You mentioned that the regents have formed a work group on college and career readiness. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, and also the role that higher education, both in the state and nationally, could play in that work. And I mention that because the American Association of Colleges and Universities has had a project for many years on general education, which dovetails with the kinds of things that you're talking about, and individual campuses and faculties have been grappling with what makes an educated person. So this really isn't that new, but there haven't always been conversations between higher education and K-12.
So, first of all, not to step on your lead, but I absolutely agree with the last thing you said. That is, and that was the point I was trying to make about the broken pipeline and the lack of backward design. The working group will absolutely invite senior folks from higher education to be part of its deliberations. It will also, of course, invite teachers. It will invite experts who are part of worrying about this question of career and technical vocational readiness. So it will not be just 4 people talking to each other. The exact numbers of people to be involved, their identities, the regions will resolve, I suspect, as early as their next regions meeting or shortly thereafter. I don't want to get ahead of the regions. They just announced this working group. It is, of course, their intention to bring in expert counsel and advice from the different sectors, from the multiple stakeholders. I think the challenge of bringing the university and the high school cultures together is one that has proved historically more difficult than I would have anticipated. Partly, I think it's a cultural issue. Our universities have tended to be praised throughout the world. Not that they don't have their challenges and their problems, but there's been a kind of sense that while there are fiscal issues and tuition for private universities is so high, and for public universities the question is, can they, how do they move forward in a context of enormous constraint, budgetary constraint. More or less, they've been the crown jewel of the education system, whereas lots of people beating up on K-12 all the time, and that does something to to that dialogue, to the shape of that dialogue. It's very surprisingly difficult to bring those groups together. I will do whatever I can, not just if it's work group, because I think it's true right the way through. I mean, take teacher preparation, right? I mean, the faculties of arts and sciences are, after all, absolutely responsible for the content knowledge of teachers in high school and middle school. And yet, in many universities, there's a kind of huge chasm between the ed school and the arts and sciences. Not everywhere. There's always a good exception. I'm making generalizations. And thirdly, the world of schools. Right? I mean, we don't, at CUNY, we only just a year or two ago got the right to appoint clinical faculty. So we couldn't historically bring in master teachers, right, as clinical professors. We need to think of this around the preparation of effective teachers rather than starting again, sort of like the zero-sum game discussion we had earlier, from our own silos. Much easier said than done. I mean, I've watched them. Usually what happens is there's a wonderful individual professor, let's say in chemistry, I'm thinking of someone at Hunter, who believes in the preparation of chemistry teachers while doing her research at the university level, while teaching graduate students. And so she's willing to design a chemistry course for pedagogy, right, for teachers. Meanwhile, in another department, they're making no interest, right? It's just like, well, they're one of my students, they're going to get exactly the same coursework as everyone else. So, in multiple dimensions, we need to bring those communities together around the core value of educating the child well. That is not an easy thing to do.
I can speak up. Ed Kubley, College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering. I really appreciate your philosophy and what you said. I've never heard anybody speak that way or eloquently about teaching and learning. I'm a product of upstate New York. I found my education. But when I went to school, it was 100. It's an A. But yet there's places in the world where you can graduate first class with distinction and you get a score of something in the 70s or 80s. It's totally un-American that you could actually get better, but still first class with distinction. I'm not used to thinking that way. And I'm not sure what that really means, but it's not an American thing I feel about. But my question fundamentally is, if you look at those places that teach the way you would like to be taught, can you show, or are there studies that show the economic implications of that? And I would think, not that you're political, but politically, to show that it works is a good thing. And then secondly, and this is a political question, would you entertain the thought of putting those master teachers first in those places where the people could benefit the most?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, good questions. So when you look at something like the McKinsey report on most effective nations' education, when you look at what research we have, and we need more, it's very interesting. Those countries have managed, not perfectly, goodness knows, let's not exaggerate, but they have done more than we have to move past this bipolar sort of constructivism, child-based learning, creativity on the one hand, and fill in the bubble on the other. They have high standards, but they have flexibility on the part of teachers in how they teach that content, right? So you might, instead of reading a Shakespeare play, to take an example from my own childhood, you act it, right? Half the class puts it on, the other half watches, critiques, and then acts the next scene, right? They memorize their parts. That's, we think hard, horrifically, but actually when you're a young child, it's not that hard. You get used to it, and like any other muscle, you get better at it. So the curriculum said, study Hamlet, right? The teacher decided how to do that. Or the curriculum said, study one of 4 tragedies. The teacher decided which one to do it. Singapore has a very, very rich set of tracks for its teachers. They can decide to become expert mentor teachers, expert master teachers. It worries about, offering them options that we don't offer. And it does worry, as we do, about getting those best teachers into the most demanding schools. We have in our Race to the Top application, we've got financial supports to do that. We are initiating new programs geared to placing effective teachers in least well-off schools. So we share that deep concern. I think that if you look at Hong Kong, Singapore, Norway, England, I'm just reciting the countries in that particular research report because it's the best known, you will see elements of what I've been talking about. A lot of worry, for example, on performance-based assessments. Right? None of those countries believe in just bubble tests because they know that skills required for success in this century are not just bubble testable. On the other hand, it's not like they've given up on literacies, right? Whenever you talk at one end of this equation in this country, you think like you're rejecting the other because we're so built into that mindset that if it's this, it can't be that. And if there's one message here, it's we've got to get past that. Other countries have. And England has Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3. There's a national curriculum. You can look it up on the web, right? On the other hand, they're going to a very much more mixed model of formative assessment and summative. This from a country that prided itself on, take that exam at the end and die by it, right? I mean, our university results by class were put in the national press. They talk about a country that believed in assessments. But it has persuaded itself that this is not an intelligent way to go about things, right? That you need to build in your learning evaluations into the coursework, right? We should be doing the same. So I do think we've been a little bit provincial, frankly, in just sort of talking to ourselves about driving numbers up. And we need to have a serious conversation about what those numbers do.
Commissioner, I'm David Schaefer with the Rockefeller Institute. Very interesting presentation, thank you. I'm interested in a little bit more about how you would operationalize what you're talking about. You look at your triangle, I guess it starts with curriculum. Let's say you have 5 years to develop a richer, better, tighter curriculum. How do you get it done?
I was hoping you'd tell me that.
No, I wasn't being facetious.
I think the first thing is to actually believe that you, in engaging the field in that question, you're doing something that matters a lot. Not just the old sense of, commissioner wants to do something, okay, let's bring in the stakeholders so that we can say we brought in the stakeholders and just, move to some conclusion the commissioner and the regents have in their minds. That's not, this is a real journey. This is about bringing in the universities and the K-12 community. This is about bringing in folks from our best performing industries and technologies. This is about a conversation about curriculum, right, and what makes sense. So this is not, you're right to put it in years rather than in months or in weeks or in days. This is hard work. We have curriculum frameworks today, as you may know, that are quite prescriptive in some places in mathematics, and you can sort of drive a bus through them in other places in other subjects. I probably shouldn't name them because you'll get on the bus, but I think that's very revealing to me, that there are some places where the political price of coming to quite a tight vision was clearly small, and there were other places where it was thought to be impossible. So I think we begin by shaping this conversation in a very non-philosophical, non-metaphysical, very pragmatic way that says right now, in this country, our 4-year college graduation rate, with a few wrinkles, has fundamentally not shifted in 20 to 25 years. A lot of people don't know that. all the money we put in, all the new assessments, all the new accountability, all this and all that. I mean, my goodness, right? And on those international tables, believe me, other countries are doing better and better on that 4-year graduation rate, and we are flat, up, 1%. Right? So we've got a problem. That's the first way you structure this conversation. This isn't about some, Greek myth in the mind of a commissioner. This is a real problem. Right? We've got a broken pipeline. We've got a broken pipeline because we have no backward planning, no vertical integration. We don't. We've got curriculum in biology in high schools that just doesn't overlap sufficiently with curriculum in college, first-year college bio classes, and the result we get huge failure rates. Right? We have 74% of CUNY freshmen in their community colleges who are being remediated. That's a failure. So let's start with the acknowledgement of problems, and then say we have no choice but to backward design a sequence. Right? This isn't, again, a philosophical argument, it's a practical argument. So now, imagine a room like this in biology. University profs from 4-year colleges, university profs from community colleges, some folks from the biotech world, high school bio teachers, middle school bio teachers, and some good elementary school teachers. And their mission is to rebuild, I'm not sure if it's ever built, to build that sequence, right, from the end point backwards. I don't think that that's a mysterious mission. Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about Hannah Arendt or the Greeks for that. I think what you have an immediate practical challenge. University professors in literature complain bitterly that students can't write long essays. Well, if you have an assessment system that never asks them to do that, right, it's not very surprising. So you have to back engineer, right? If we're going to ask folks to do certain things in colleges, you have to actually prepare them to do it, right? It's not. Then again, you have to have people at high school who worry about the fact that our students are deeply turned off their school, right? So it's not just a simple point of connect the dots from the college backwards. It's what does the learning environment look like in the schools, such that we engage these students around serious learning in ways that reach them, new forms of technology, new spaces, learning outside of school. So I think what you task your teams with is responding to a major crisis in the breakdown of that sequence of education. That's their responsibility. And I think there's a lot of genuine excitement. Yes, there's always going to be opposition to any difficult move. Of course, people are going to worry about, a district that feels very proud of its curriculum in English and doesn't want to give it up, and a city that's made a major investment in this math curriculum. So we have a lot of difficult thinking to do. But I think the mission would be relatively.
And this should probably be our last question.
I'm Diana Hinchcliffe from the Education Department. This is not a trick question. And if I put the commission on the spot, am I going to hear about it later? No, listening to everything you said, the one thing we didn't touch on were skills that are required for the workplace. And let me talk about how that all meshes. When I went to school in the last century, I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now, that I was being prepared to be an educated citizen. There were no required assessments. We had both formative and summative assessments, but the value of the education we were receiving was very well-rounded, now that I think about it. So you're talking about we need to get back to that, and I don't think required assessments are going to go away, so we'll have an element of that. We have to prepare students to go to college so they don't need all that remediation, and the workplace, which is very much more complex than it was when we were growing up, now demands certain practical skills that they expect kids to graduate with. So how do we balance all of that and give people a good education at the same time?
there's a fundamental vision that was No Child Left Behind, that is the 5 regions, that is what might be called the democratic promise. What it says is one standard, indivisible, right, for all. Because to say anything else is to open the door for dead-end tracks for underprivileged children. The problem has been that while that is compelling, I want to underline that is compelling. The first thing that went wrong with it is you realized that if a child made a lot of progress but didn't hit that standard, no one was recognized having done anything good. Not the child, not the teachers. That struck people as wrong. And it strikes the federal government as wrong, that goodness. The second thing that went wrong is that that standard, that single standard, had to be somewhere, right? You had to pitch it somewhere in the state, local plus regular diploma, more or less 5 scores of 65. But why there? What did that mean, right? What it meant was thousands of kids who felt that that standard was in cuckoo land for them stopped going to school. They just dropped out of high school. It was just too far beyond where they could think they would ever be. For thousands of other kids, they got that standard, then they went to community college, and they realized they weren't ready. And suddenly they were flunking their first year community college things, and it was over. They dropped out. But yet other students, they passed their regions, and then they took the APs or the IBs or the SAT 2s, and they went on to the 4-year colleges. And so for them, the regions were, kind of, it's next week's the regions, okay, and then, when's my sports time? So the question is, what exactly is that one standard doing? Is it in fact ensuring that more students are being taught better than without it? That's a very difficult question to answer. Very difficult. In some cases, it's clear that it is working. That is, that more students in a particular city or place are getting to that standard than were before. And that's incredibly important. But it also raises the question of what is sacred about a single standard. And that's where your question comes in. So let's say that tomorrow we had a vision that said, in order to graduate from high school, you've got to get the following scores on 2 regions, and you've got to show competency in multimedia, right? And you've got to show competency in one of the art forms, and in a foreign language, right? And those 3 other regions' competencies have to average a 65, right? You could do better than one, weaker than the other. Now, that's one of about 1 million permutations, right? We could speak for the next week about what that looks like. There is no magic solution. But somewhere in thoughtful discussion in this working group, the question you ask has to be asked, right? Because, let me give you 2 examples. Let's say you had one standard that was a community college ready standard that said, if you meet this standard, you are ready for community college. You will not be remediated, right? The community colleges have accepted this standard. Well, that standard might have no multimedia technology component. It might have nothing to do with the arts. Or it might just be an English and math standard, right? Are you ready to say that person's educated, even though they've met the community college requirement? Or vocational technical track. Yes, absolutely, I'm ready to be employed, right? I'm ready to come into this workplace. I've done an apprenticeship. I've gotten a certificate that's recognized by the profession. Surely you should let me go, right? You owe state. After all, you said I could choose not to go to college, right? Isn't that a basic freedom? Are we ready to say that with no academic credentials, I'm being extreme here, but just to make the point, no academic credentials in English or math, we're ready to let you go? So there's no magic answer to your question, but that fundamental issue of balancing what we think we minimally owe to our citizens who are growing up with providing meaningful tracks. One of the regents, Regent Young, once said to me, the problem is not so much tracks, the problem is tracks that don't lead. That was always the fear. Right? If you open a vocational track, some schools will only do the vocational track. And a kid who could have been dreaming about, advanced science never gets the opportunity. On the other hand, if there's a single standard and the kid looks at it and says, I'm 20 miles away from that, I don't know why I'm going to school, that hasn't achieved anything either. This is hard work. This is very, very
You have given us an awful lot to think about on a wide range of subjects. As you said, there are many others that we didn't have time for today. We certainly hope that you will be willing to come back to the Rockefeller Institute. We look forward to that.
Thank you so much.